Okay, good morning, class. I was just finishing up taking attendance, and everybody that's in here, I have you down for attendance today. I did start the recording. I have some work to do because I need to upload the previous classes that we have recorded, so I will do that later today and tomorrow. Once I finish a class, it does take a day or so for Blackboard to upload the recording, so I'll work on that after class today. Okay, so we've completed all we need to know about carbs, but I am going to review blood glucose for the first 10 or 15 minutes of class. And then today we're going to talk about fat, and Thursday we're going to talk about protein. So we do have 2 learning modules this week, so make sure you do both the learning module on fat and the learning module on protein. Each learning module has a quiz and a discussion. So you do 2 quizzes, 2 discussions this week. Okay, before we get to fat, I am going to review a bit on blood glucose. And I'm hoping that you were able to talk a little bit with someone about blood glucose over the weekend. The best way for you guys to learn the material is kind of to applying it right away. And in this case, I wanted you to tell the blood glucose story to someone over the weekend. I also sent you out a video about blood glucose. Hopefully you got a chance to look at that. If not, the videos are in Blackboard. And we're just going to go through this quickly here, and then I'll ask if you guys got questions on blood glucose. So remember, we're going to draw our blood vessel here. And in that blood vessel, we have glucose. Now, the glucose in the bloodstream is really what fuels the brain, the central nervous system. And it has to be within a certain level. We said no less than like 70 or 80 on the bottom, and no less than about 120 on the top. If it does happen to go less or higher than these numbers, then we're not very healthy. We're not going to be functioning well. So the body will automatically try to keep your blood glucose between 80 and 120. Okay. And I did talk about, I quickly talked about this, but I want to touch on it again. What is it called when we're less than 80 in the bloodstream? When we don't have a lot of blood glucose and we fall below 80 or 70, we call that hypoglycemia. So that's when our blood glucose is too low. And when we have hypoglycemia, we're going to oftentimes be mentally confused, maybe incoherent. There could be profuse sweating. There could be confusion. A person could faint. If hypoglycemia happens severely and it goes down to 50s, 40s, 30s, the person could potentially die. So it is life-threatening, which is why our body has a mechanism in place to try to prevent the blood glucose from dropping very low with the use of hormones, okay? If we go above 120, so we're higher than what we should, we call it hyperglycemia. So this is too high. The blood glucose is too high. Hyperglycemia. And the thing with hyperglycemia is the symptoms aren't as pronounced as hypoglycemia. If you're in a state of hypoglycemia, some people describe it as a person's acting like drunk or they actually faint. I mean, there's something wrong with someone who has hypoglycemia. Hyperglycemia, very vague symptoms. Typically, the person is tired, falls asleep, could be a little nauseous. If it's really high, they might vomit. But really, that's the primary symptoms of hyperglycemia. You're tired. You might urinate frequently, more than normal. And this is why when we talked last week, I said if you eat a large meal, especially with a lot of processed carbs, and your blood glucose goes up, a lot of people fall asleep after they eat. That is a sign of hyperglycemia. What's happening is insulin is working to lower your blood glucose so it gets back down to normal. And when insulin's working, we often feel very tired. And I talk to you guys, I just put the word tired here. I talk to you guys like People say, oh, they eat a big meal, so they may feel sleepy after. They eat Thanksgiving dinner, they fall asleep after. Maybe you're going to have a party this weekend for Super Bowl, and you eat some processed carbs, or maybe you overeat, overdrink a little bit, and you're really tired later on. That's insulin working to control your hypoglycemia. So what we want is we want our blood glucose between 80 and 120. If you do not have diabetes, your body could automatically get to this interval of 80 and 120 without you even thinking about it. Okay? I don't know why I did that. I was actually trying to clear off. I guess it worked. I was trying to clear my whiteboard because I don't want those words interfering when we talk about this. So we have our bloodstream with glucose in it, right? Normal blood glucose, about 80 to 120. Okay. So we eat some foods. We wake up, well, we should start it this way. We kind of wake up in the morning, we're probably about 70. A lot of people think 70 is normal. We've lowered the threshold a little bit on the lower end to try to prevent diabetes. So when we wake up, we might be in the 70s or 80s, and that's perfectly fine. Depending on what we eat and how much of it, our blood glucose will rise. Okay, and that blue line is an indicator that blood glucose is rising. So think about what kind of foods, and I'm going to ask you to share, what kind of foods will cause my blood glucose to go up very high and very quickly? Somebody just verbally give me some ideas. David.
So actual foods, right?
What did you say?
You want us to list actual foods?
Yeah.
So things like donuts or high sugary foods, like I want to say just candy, really.
Yep. Donuts, candy. Angelica said juice, which is correct as well. Let's say you get up in the morning, you have a large glass of orange juice. You have some Dunkin' Donuts. Those will all cause your blood glucose to go up pretty quickly. Anybody else have other ideas of what would cause our glucose to go very high? You could type it in the chat room, or you could raise your hand. Cereal may, simple sugars will, fruit and soda. Soda for sure will. Let me talk a little bit about cereal and fruit for a moment. Cereal, it really depends with both of these. With cereal, certainly the milk will make your blood glucose go up. So definitely on milk, definitely on dairy products. There's no fiber in them. There's no fiber in the dairy products. And so when we eat foods with a lot of fiber, it will moderate or lower how quickly the blood glucose gets into our bodies. So the more fiber, the better if we don't want a fast rise in blood glucose. Now, if you're putting high fiber cereal in the bowl, that would be better than putting a cereal low fiber and lots of sucrose. So it really depends. I mean, we have some good cereals that will not rise your blood glucose very quickly, but then other things like Frosted Flakes or Cocoa Puffs, or what kind of cereal you guys like, they might make your blood glucose go up a little bit quicker. All right, so you got to read the labels. That's the deal with cereal. Milk for sure. If you just drink a plain glass of milk, it really will act just like orange juice or Kool-Aid in terms of raising your blood glucose. Fruit is not going to be that bad. Fruit has a lot of fiber in it. We do know that fruit does have simple carbohydrates in it. It's fructose. Fruit has fructose. So we would think, well, the fructose is simple, it'll cause a quick rise in blood glucose. But because fruit is very high in fiber, the fiber actually protects that from happening. So we get a slower rise with fruit than we would just say juice. All right, so always remember the presence of fiber protects this little blue spike from going up too high, right? This might be if we just drank orange juice plain, and this might be if we had a real orange with actually eating the whole thing. All right, so the fiber is protecting us. Once before we go on to what happens, what about foods that cause a slow rise in blood glucose? Maybe you don't even get over 120, or maybe a tiny blip over 120 for breakfast. What would be some good foods that do not cause a drastic rise in blood glucose? Again, write it in the chat room, or you could verbally say it. High fiber foods like oatmeal, correct. Any high fiber food. In addition to the oatmeal, any kind of whole grain. Now, most people like the oatmeal for breakfast. That's a common food, but any whole grain would do that. I mean, if somebody decided they were going to do barley or quinoa, that would be the same. Again, if you pick a high fiber cereal, what I do is I pick a high fiber cereal and I don't add a lot of milk. Sometimes I'll only add like a half a cup of milk. People think I'm really crazy. I might even put a splash of water if I want actually more liquid in it. But the high fiber cereals are great too in the morning because they often are loaded with vitamins. Eggs really don't have carbs. So they are pretty much all protein and fat. So they'll be insignificant when it comes to changes in blood glucose because they don't have a lot of glucose in them. Okay. Now, if you eat it with other things like syrup or fried in some oil, then that might change the story. But eggs don't have much carbs. So what else could I eat that will cause a slow rise in blood glucose for breakfast? We know whole grains. Anything else? And I'll get your question in a moment, Talia. Anything else I can eat that'll cause a slower rise in blood glucose that is carbohydrate? If it's a whole grain pasta, Anastasia said spaghetti. If it's a whole grain, then yes. If it is white pasta, here's what white pasta will do. Go straight up. And remember what I said, white pasta, if it's a processed grain, it acts just like a simple carbohydrate. So, and I'm going to draw this just in green for another. A processed carb, and it will act like that green line. It's white pasta, white rice, white bread, white bagels, donuts. That's all going to cause an increase in blood glucose. If it's whole grain, if it's a whole grain one, like whole grain bagel, it'll be a slower rise. Okay. Popcorn, that's good. Popcorn will be a slower rise. That's a whole grain, actually. Popcorn's a whole grain. Vegetables, nobody said veggies. People forget vegetables have carbohydrates. They have fiber and complex carbs, so vegetables are great options. Okay, so we know depending on what we eat and how much of it will dictate how quickly our blood glucose rises. Once we go over 120, we have a hormone called insulin. And insulin will pick up the extra blood glucose, right? It's coming out of the bloodstream, picks up the extra blood glucose and brings it to one of three storage sites. The first site we store at, liver. Second would be muscle. What's the third, guys? If our liver and muscle fill up, where do we put the rest of the glucose?
Fat.
Body fat, also known as adipose tissue. There you go. That's what happens with the excess blood glucose. So if we're eating whole grains and vegetables and fruits and lots of high fiber, we will go over 120, but we can store that extra 120, above 120, in our liver or muscle as glycogen, and we're not going to be putting on a lot of body fat. If we're eating a lot of simple carbohydrates, lots of foods with no fiber, processed grains, what's going to happen is that liver and muscle will fill up because there's so much glucose in the blood. The liver and muscle might fill up, and then the rest of it is going to go into body fat. And that's how processed grains and sugars, white flour and sugar, causes increased body fat. Okay. When we go to exercise, we're going to pull energy from muscle glycogen and fat for the muscles to use. If it's high intensity, we use a lot of muscle glycogen. If it's lower intensity, we'll use more fat, but it's always a combo of both muscle glycogen and fat when we do exercise. So it's good to do that, right? It's good to exercise so your meals when we have meals with glucose in them, that glucose has somewhere to go when we need to store it. We want it to go more in the muscles, not as much in the body fat. So we use the muscle glycogen up when we work out, and then the next time we eat, we can accept more glucose in the muscle to store it as muscle glycogen. Now, if we've gone long periods of time without eating and our blood glucose starts to dip into hypoglycemia, we have another hormone called glucagon. And what this hormone will do is it will try to go to the storage sites, find glucose, and put it back in the bloodstream so our brain has that fuel it needs as blood glucose. Okay? And this is really the blood glucose story. If you do not have diabetes, your body will maintain your blood glucose between 80 and 120 automatically without you even have to think about it by using insulin and glucagon. Now, what happens, people that are diabetic, their insulin either doesn't work well or they don't have any insulin. Type 1 diabetics do not have insulin, and that's usually diagnosed earlier in life. They used to call it like juvenile diabetes because people would know by the time they were like 10, 11, 12 years old that they had that problem. And then the ones that occur later in life, the insulin just kind of gets worn out and stops working. I mean, it's there, but it just doesn't work anymore. And that's type 2 diabetes. And what they're thinking is diabetes has a huge genetic link, but if you're constantly over 120 and insulin is constantly working, it might wear out. And there's a genetic predisposition to that. I have that. Both my parents have diabetes. So I have to watch it because my insulin, could be a little sensitive already. It might give out due to genetic reasons. So I have to make sure that I'm not overworking the insulin, that I'm not constantly over 120 in blood glucose. So what I do is really, I don't sit around taking my blood glucose or thinking about it on a daily basis, but I say to myself, all right, most of the food I eat today should be high fiber, should be complex carbs like vegetables, whole grains, with some fruit thrown in there as well. If I do eat any simple carbs, I have to be careful. If I'm drinking milk, it should be with cereal that has high fiber in it. I don't want to drink it by itself. If I'm eating a processed carb, I want to make sure that I have some type of fiber food with it. And I'll put it to you this way. If I'm eating pasta, I got to have some fiber on the side with it. It could be salad, it could be soup, beans, vegetables thrown in the pasta. So there's ways to do it, ways where you can't say, well, I can never eat pasta again, or I can never eat a donut again. Yes, you can, but again, 80% of your food really should be of the better quality for two reasons. Number one, you want to give your body the energy it needs, and number two, we're trying to prevent illnesses. Okay. What kind of questions do you have about blood glucose before we move on to fat? And I'll take a break here from talking. What do you guys think? So, okay, very interesting. So Anastasia had wrote a little note in the chat room that she had hypoglycemia. So what do you feel like? Again, you could type this or just, if I ask a question you're not comfortable answering, that's okay too. But do you know when it's coming on? Do you have like any signs or symptoms that tell you you're starting to have low blood glucose? Typically, I'm going to type a little bit too. Shakiness, okay. Yeah. Shakiness really is kind of your brain not perceiving that it has enough glucose. Dry heaving. So I could tell, I do not have diabetes, but I can tell sometimes when I have a low blood glucose, I start getting dizzy, or I can't think very straight. My one child, my older child, he's 12. He has hypoglycemia constantly. And what he will do, ironically, is just start crying for no reason. And he'll say to me, like, I feel fine. I'm not sad or anything, but his reaction, because our emotions are controlled by our brain, and when his brain doesn't have that glucose it needs, I call it like a breakdown. He'll kind of have a breakdown. And I know right away, what I do is typically give him milk so he gets some sugar quickly, But then, I'll make him have a whole meal. I'll make him have his next meal, whether that's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, right away. So, you could tell with the low blood glucose, you could tell with hypoglycemia, people will have symptoms. With hyperglycemia, really the only thing you're going to feel is probably tired. Does anyone have any questions anymore about the blood glucose story? And when I say that, I want to make sure you know what normal blood glucose is, what happens if you are above 120, to put that glucose in storage, and what happens when we're below 80 so we don't pass out, right? And glucagon is contingent on, do you have stores of glucose? If you don't have stores of glucose, glucagon's not going to work. So we got to make sure we have adequate muscle glycogen to rise our blood glucose if need be. And lastly, I want to make sure you know how body fat and muscle glycogen, work. How do we put on body fat? How do we put glycogen in the muscle? And those are your sources for exercise.
I had a question about the video.
Yeah. Whose hand is up? I got to switch my screen real quick here.
Tale, it's me. Hi.
Okay, your screen froze. Go ahead and tell me the question.
About the video, I know that they talked about soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So would broccoli count as a insoluble fiber?
I think it would have a little bit of both, but let me put it to you this way.
Okay.
The soluble fiber are the ones that dissolve in water. And those typically are the ones in fruit and vegetable, soluble. So what we do is we eat that, and it actually becomes gelatinous and dissolves in water. It looks like Jell-O once it's in the water. And those soluble fibers are the ones that really control cholesterol. They fill you up, because imagine it's like almost putting like Jell-O in your belly. You feel distended, you feel full. Those are the ones, the soluble ones are the ones that prevent disease. They will prevent cardiovascular disease. They will prevent diabetes. And we typically find soluble in broccoli, in fruits and vegetables. Okay. Now, the insoluble are the ones that do not dissolve in water. So I know the word is weird, it's in, but think of that as meaning not. In means not dissolving in water. So with the insoluble fiber, the way it goes in is the way it comes out. Think of it as just roughage. It doesn't really digest. So, and those are in a lot of whole grains. They fill you up too. I mean, you will feel, again, distended in your stomach. You will feel fuller. But they really help more with your gastrointestinal system and some cancer prevention. So both are important to have, both soluble and insoluble. What I feel like is a lot of people lack the soluble. A lot of people aren't eating their fruits and vegetables, so they're not getting enough soluble. And if they're eating whole grains or cereals, or they're taking a supplement like Fiber One, Metamucil, those tend to be insoluble. And they do a lot of good for your digestive system and cancer, but they're not helping too much with the diabetes or heart disease, with cardiovascular. So again, both are important. But the reason I pause here on saying that is, we want to eat our food. We want to eat our nutrients. Don't rely on supplements, because I've come across people that say, well, I don't eat fruits and vegetables, but I take Metamucil. Or I'm just going to eat a Fiber One bar and I'll be good. You're probably not getting the soluble when you do that. So make sure we're eating our nutrients. There's many reasons we should eat our nutrients rather than take supplements. That's one of them. So great question on the fiber. Definitely we want fiber to slow down the rise of blood glucose. Okay. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if I said this to you or not. When I was pregnant, I did have diabetes. And the funny thing was, if I ate a meal with super salad that was high fiber, I would have a lower increase in blood glucose than if I did not eat the soup or salad. So I'm actually eating more food, but because it was so high fiber, it actually lowered my blood glucose. So let's say I decided for lunch I'm just going to have a ham sandwich. Okay, I have the ham sandwich, my blood glucose goes up to 140. I have the ham sandwich with a salad, my blood glucose only going up to like 130. So there was a change by adding the fiber. And that's really one of the main things I did to control it is every meal, high fiber, and after every meal, walk, even if it's 5 minutes. Because what walking will do is you're burning off some of that glucose so we don't have to store it. And that's a great tip for your family and friends that have diabetes right now. After every meal, don't tell them go for a mile walk or half an hour. Just say, 5 minutes. A lot of times what will happen is they go for the 5 minutes. They're like, I could go a little bit longer. And that really helps clear out that glucose. All right. Any other questions? Well, I would say, Angelica, if you feel like you're getting dizzy during the day, or you feel symptoms of hypoglycemia, I would talk to your doctor because then they can run a blood test. Know that the symptoms of hypoglycemia, that dizziness, shakiness, can't think right, maybe profuse sweat, that could actually come from not enough water too. So you can feel the same if you're not drinking enough. If you're really dehydrated, you're going to get dizzy, maybe not think clearly. So one of the two things. But I would go to the doctor and say you want a blood test. Now I encourage all of you get a blood test once a year.
I have a quick question about like dehydration. Are you able to, like, when you know you're really dehydrated, are you able to drink some Pedialyte to kind of help with the electrolytes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Pedialyte is really going to do the same thing as like a Gatorade would, but it's
Okay.
made for kids. Yeah. And so when we talk about water and hydration in a couple of weeks, we want to replenish our liquids with not only water, but also the electrolytes. We want to make sure we're getting both. Okay. And sometimes if we have a healthy diet, we get our electrolytes in the food we eat. Again, another reason to eat healthy. You're going to get your vitamins and minerals, which are electrolytes, to help you with your water balance. Okay. If you're not eating healthy, you might not be getting your electrolytes from your diet, then you might need a supplement. Okay. Anything else on blood glucose before we move on to fat? No? I'm going to have you watch a quick video on this blood glucose. Know that this video, I'm going to share my screen, was made by someone trying to prevent diabetes. I'm not as interested in that part of it, so I will probably end it early because we're not really talking about diabetes. I just want you to see a visualization of how the glucose goes into your body and how it gets stored. And they will talk a little bit about a mineral that's in our food, a nutrient. It's a mineral. It's called chromium. Chromium actually helps with blood glucose usage. So that's why they're talking about it here. And we'll talk more about chromium when we get to vitamins and diabetes as well. But just a quick visual of blood glucose, and then we'll move on.
18.2 million Americans have diabetes, and this is projected to reach 30.3 million by 2030. Nearly 1 million Americans died from cardiovascular disease in 2000. 1 in 3 Americans born in the year 2000 will develop diabetes if steps aren't taken to prevent it. Insulin resistance is the common link to these and other health conditions. The role of chromium, an essential mineral important to insulin function, holds great promise in managing these diseases. Nutrition 21 is pioneering this breakthrough in metabolic science. During digestion, carbohydrates are broken down into glucose or blood sugar, the body's main source of energy, which is then absorbed into the bloodstream. In response to rising glucose or blood sugar levels, insulin, the body's master metabolic hormone, is released from the pancreas. Healthy insulin function, which influences carbohydrate metabolism, requires adequate chromium levels. Chromium helps insulin bind to the insulin receptors lining each cell, stimulating glucose transporters, which move to the cell surface. Glucose enters the cell and is converted to energy. chromium levels are compromised by poor nutrition, especially as we age. Inadequate chromium levels contribute to decreased stimulation of glucose transporters. Glucose cannot enter the cells, building to unhealthy levels in the bloodstream.
So here you see the glucose is in the bloodstream. If we could get the insulin to bind to the muscle wall, then the receptor will open, the glucose can go in and store as muscle glycogen. The same thing happens with liver glycogen. We get it through the wall and we can store it as glycogen. If the muscle's completely filled up, if the liver is completely filled up and there's no more room, then the glucose goes in as body fat. If the insulin by chance does not bind to this muscle wall, if it's insensitive, it's not working well, the glucose is just going to stay in the bloodstream. And you'll continually keep getting higher and higher, 140, 150, 160, 200 plus. So that's the story of blood glucose. Okay. We are moving on to fat today, our second nutrient. So kind of switch stories here. Remember, all our nutrients are really, really important. We have to have an adequate amount of all of our nutrients. And the macronutrients are carbs, fat, and protein. You guys can all see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So fat is the second nutrient we're going to talk about. Fat is great if we eat the correct healthy versions of fat. And you can see on your screen on the right-hand side, these are all great sources of healthy fat. Do you guys eat any of those foods in the image?
Avocado.
A good one. What else? Can you guys tell me? I can't see the chat room right now. Are you guys eating fish, nuts, seeds?
Yeah, I have salmon maybe like 3 times a month.
That's awesome. Healthy oils, olive oil.
I'm pescatarian, so I eat fish all the time, and then nuts for snacks, and avocado is literally my favorite fruit, so.
Good, good. Those are all great versions of healthy fat. And the reason why these foods in this image are healthy is they don't contain a large amount of fat. It's only a couple of grams, but it's very, very important because the fat really maintains the integrity and health of our brain and heart. We need this to keep our brain healthy and our heart healthy. So we'll get into the functions in a moment. But you see some images of these healthy fats here. What is a fat made of? Remember those 7 questions we talked about we have to know for every nutrient? Fat is made of glycerol and fatty acids. And so here's an image of it. Here's the glycerol backbone and 3 fatty acids. Other than knowing that, you don't have to know much more about what these bonds are, other than what makes up fat. So here we have glycerol and fatty acid. Okay. And this is, if we get it into our bloodstream, we'll call it triglycerides, right? Because there's three strands here. So fat floating around in our blood, we call that triglycerides. So what does fat do? And you have on the screen the functions of fat. I want you just to remember there's one additional one besides what you see on the screen. Fat maintains the integrity of your brain and central nervous system. Most physiologists will tell you your brain is really made of fat. And that is why kids, and during pregnancy for the baby, we want kids to have a higher fat percentage in their diet than adults. They actually need more fat because it makes up their brain and central nervous system. If we start eliminating the healthy fats, our brain deteriorates and we start getting dementias, memory loss, Alzheimer's, and even mental illnesses like depression. So we have to maintain the healthy fat to maintain our brain. In addition to that, it protects our heart, right? It will transport fat-soluble vitamins, and there's 4 vitamins that are fat-soluble. Vitamin A, D, E, and K. Now, on my instructor notes, I have this all listed if you guys want to print out the instructor notes for fat. So fat actually helps transport these fat-soluble vitamins. So we can use vitamin A, D, E, and K. Fat will protect our organs. It does insulate every organ. It does protect them in case we were hit or we fell. It gives us a little cushion so we don't hurt our organs. It insulates the body to keep us warm. We do have a layer of fat right below the skin to help keep us warm. And then it's the most concentrated source of energy. That means it has 1 gram of fat has more energy than 1 gram of a carb. But we know that our muscles will use a combination of fat and carbohydrate every time they work. Okay, so that's where our energy comes from, fat and carbs. All right, let's see next. Oh. All right, we have 9 calories in 1 gram of fat. Now remember, carbs have 4. We have 9, so it's double and a little more. This is why I think fat gets a bad rap, is it has a lot of calories. And if we were to eat a processed food that has a lot of grams of fat in it, we would get a lot of calories in our body. If we were to eat a healthier food that has fat in it, it tends to only have a couple grams. So that might only be if we had a serving of avocado, maybe somebody can look this up for me. You know, avocado or salmon, it does not have a lot of grams of fat. So we're not going to have a large accumulation of calories. Okay. We'll leave it at that. We'll get back to it in a moment. How much should we eat in our diet? Well, you can see the numbers on your screen, but I always say about 20% of your diet should be fat, mostly the healthy ones. Okay, because there is healthy and then there's not so healthy fat, but about 20%. So we're going to go with 60% of our diet carbs, 20% fat, 20% protein as is a good aim. So let's talk about the types. One type is called saturated, and this is the one we don't have to avoid completely, but we want to limit. Because if we're eating fat from an animal, it tends to have a lot of grams. So somebody do this for me. If you're paying attention, you got your cell phone next to you, look up how many grams of saturated fat in a stick of butter. 1 whole stick of butter, how many grams of saturated fat? And then just yell it out. You can interrupt me when you get that number. But saturated fat is in anything that comes from an animal. Dairy products come from an animal. So yes, saturated fat is in butter.
7 grams. Oh
In a
no,
whole
it's
stick.
1 tablespoon. So
Yeah, it's more.
113 grams.
In a stick of butter, there's 113 grams.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
See how
well,
that is?
Leia said 58.
I need someone else then to tell me the tiebreaker. I need a tiebreaker here. I can't remember this. Anybody else? What is it?
58.
Okay, so 58 times 9. There's 522 calories in a stick of butter just from fat. Okay, and there'll be a little bit of protein, a little bit of carbs, but mostly fat. So the reason saturated fat is so bad is it tends to be a lot of grams in the food that we eat. It's not that you eat 1 tablespoon of butter, you're going to die of a heart attack. No, it's if we overeat saturated fat, we're going to get a ton of calories. And what happens when we have a lot of fat in our system, it all gets stored as fat. There's no other place for it. It all gets stored as body fat. With carbs, you could put some in your liver and muscle. With fat, it's just anything extra that you're not using gets stored as body fat right away. So saturated fat is not like the devil, the worst thing ever. But what we have to watch is we don't overeat on it. So we could still have a tablespoon of butter. We could still have a glass of milk. But we have to really be moderate with it so we don't get too many calories. In terms of weight control, the more calories in, the higher you're going to weigh. And it doesn't matter where those calories come from, whether it's carbs, fat, or protein. So with saturated fat, it's just really easy to overeat because it's in large quantities in our animal products. And then we get to our more healthier fats. We have monounsaturated, which you see on your screen now, and then we'll have next a polyunsaturated. Okay, so with these are the liquid fats, and they're from plants. The monounsaturated and polyunsaturated are liquid, and they're from our plants. So they're a little bit healthier to eat. Monounsaturated will not necessarily cause disease, and if it's coming in a plant form, you're not going to get a lot of grams from that plant. If it is coming in liquid oil, like olive oil, canola oil, again, if you're using a lot of it, it could add up in calories pretty quickly. Okay, so we want to use our like 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon. We don't want to be consuming like a cup of canola oil every day because, again, we're multiplying grams times 9. We're going to get a lot of calories. The healthiest fats to eat are polyunsaturated. When we talk about good fats, healthy fats, this is what we're talking about, the polyunsaturated fats. There's maybe a gram in every vegetable you eat. Remember we talked about a whole grain? And that little 1/3 of the grain was called germ. In that germ of a whole grain, you're getting about 1 gram of polyunsaturated fat. It's only 9 calories. When we're eating our vegetables, when we're eating our whole grains, it's even if it's in fish. Okay, the way fish gets healthy fat is it eats something that was a green vegetable. It will eat seaweed. It will eat sea vegetables, and that's how that fish gets the healthy fat in it. The same thing would be it could be another kind of animal, like say it's a grass-fed cow. It's eating a healthy diet. It's going to get the healthy fat in it. What the problem would be is if it was a farm-raised, right? If it's farm-raised cow, pigs, fish, we don't know what its diet is. I'm not so sure it's going to have the healthy fat in it. So we could get it from an animal source, but where polyunsaturated truly originates is in dark green leafy vegetables, sea vegetables, and whole grains in that little germ. Now there are 2 kinds of the omegas. Omega-3 reduces inflammation. Omega-6 promotes inflammation. Now remember, these 2 are polyunsaturated fats. There's 2 kinds, omega-3 and omega-6. We need both. We need to eat both. Omega-3s are in that little germ from the whole grains and vegetables. Omega-6s, they actually come a little bit in eggs, corn oil, some meats. But we do want both, and I have a slide that'll show you where they're coming from. So here's omega-3s. Really think about it coming from grass, sea vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables. This fish could eat that. The wild caught fish is eating those sea vegetables. So we're getting a lot of it from that fish. It could be fortified in eggs. Like if this chicken is eating a healthy diet, then the eggs are going to have omega-3s in it. Algae, plankton, this is your sea vegetables. Also add on here, think in your mind, any dark green leafy vegetables. Spinach, escarole, romaine is going to have about 1 gram. And then plant-based source, flaxseed, walnuts, almonds, any nut or seed is going to have omega-3. Here's some options. I think this is directly out of your book. So people say, what can I eat to get omega-3? These are the ones that decrease inflammation in the body. So it's going to prevent heart disease. It's going to maintain the integrity of your brain. So they got flaxseed oil, salmon oil, fish oils, flaxseed, herring, salmon, canola, sardines, walnuts, shrimp. So you're thinking, well, if I don't eat any kind of fish, what can I do? Nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables. Look at avocado, spinach. So you can get it without eating the nuts or, the fish, if you're someone who doesn't like fish. Plant omega-3s. If you hear the word alpha-linoleic acid, that's omega-3. Okay. This just talks a little bit about where the fish get the omega-3 from its diet, if it's eating sea vegetables or fish that eat sea vegetables. And it really helps promote your brain. It's going to promote normal cognitive functioning. This is important to ward off dementia and mental illness, specifically depression. There's been a ton of research that people who are not eating omega-3s end up with more dementia. The worst dementia is called Alzheimer's, and more cases of depression. Now, you could get depression for other reasons. It's not only nutrient related, but one type of depression is due to not enough omega-3s in the diet. Okay. And I'm a firm believer that that is one of the reasons women may be getting postpartum depression after giving birth, is if they're depleted of their omega-3s because the baby took it all. And that's why they're actually putting omega-3s in a lot of prenatal pills now. If they're not putting omega-3 in the prenatal vitamin or mineral pill you're taking, then you could actually get a supplement just of the omega-3s, because we want to ward off any postpartum depression, but also keep mom and baby's brain and heart healthy. Again, here's another slide. You guys can review this again, just the benefits of omega-3. So when we're eating our healthy fat in nuts and seeds and broccoli and flaxseed, salmon, tuna, walnuts, healthy oils like olive oil or safflower oil, we're going to prevent a lot of diseases you see here. And I've mentioned that again. A couple that I haven't talked about yet: arthritis, cancer, mood swings, circulation. Now, omega-6, these promote inflammation, which always is not bad. We do need to have omega-6, right? We want homeostasis in our body. We don't want too much inflammation, and we don't want not enough. We want it to be moderate and in the middle. And so we will get omega-6 from some meat, eggs, and plant oils. Now, if you look at this screen, this looks more like a typical American diet: meats, eggs, maybe we use some oil when we're cooking. So the American diet tends to have more omega-6s in it than the omega-3s. And so what ends up happening is if somebody's eating a lot of meat and eggs and a lot of animal products, they're going to get more inflammation than they should. Because remember, the omega-3 is anti-inflammation. So remember, both are important, but in a normal, they call it a Western diet. In the normal American diet, people eat more omega-6s than 3s, and that puts their body out of balance. We have to encourage people to start eating more omega-3s consciously, so that they consciously choose healthy fish, healthy seeds, healthy vegetables during the day. So again, we want the ratio. We want both of them. For every 2 omega-6s that we eat, we should get at least 1 omega-3. Okay, as best case scenario. It would even be better. It would even be okay to have, like, for every 4 foods that you eat that are omega-6, have 1 that's an omega-3. But what the data is showing in the Western diet right now, there are people that are eating like 25 times more omega-6s than 3s. And so they're getting set up to have more inflammation diseases, more heart disease, more Alzheimer's diseases, more arthritis, more things that are caused by the inflammation. So how can I tell what kind of foods have what kind of fat in them? So again, this is from your text. Typically, a food will have multiple kinds of fat. On your screen, the red color is saturated. The blue color is monounsaturated. And then the green color is poly. And we want the polys. We want foods that are high in polyunsaturated. Okay, those are the omega-3s and the omega-6s. So if I look on this screen, what is it telling me? The best fats that I can find in foods are walnuts. I'm going to say sesame oil. What else? Tuna. Not so bad. I mean, even like salmon, 28. A little bit of chicken breast has polyunsaturated. I would caution about this corn and canola oil because a lot of that might be genetically modified, and we will talk about that later this semester. Genetically modified meaning that it's been altered and it might not be the healthiest for us. They do a lot of altering of corn and canola in the United States. But I think that great oils would be olive oil, sesame oil, safflower oil when we're using it cooking. Did someone have a question?
Yeah, the coconut oil. I see it's at the top and it's like all red for saturated fatty acids. Is it a bad oil?
Well, it's no worse than butter, right? Look at butter. I mean, it's just the coconut oil is solid at room temperature. And that's really the differentiating factor is fats that are solid at room temperature tend to promote more disease than the ones that are liquid at room temperature if you're using an oil. So butter, lard, coconut, it's solid at room temperature. So it does have more saturation. It is considered a saturated fat. Do I think butter and coconut oil are going to cause disease? They won't unless you're eating too many calories of them. So we can still use them. We can still use butter and coconut oil, but limit it to your tablespoon. Okay, so we're limiting it, so we're limiting our calories. The way butter and coconut oil, or even ground beef or anything made with an animal fat contributes to disease is if we're eating a lot of calories, we're storing it as body fat, and that increase in body fat could lead to disease. I hope that makes sense to you guys. It's not that you're going to eat a tablespoon of coconut oil and get a heart attack. No. Same thing with butter. Butter has been around forever. And we really have seen an increase in chronic diseases not starting until like 1970s, 1980s. We really haven't seen this huge spike of cardiovascular disease, obesity, cancers until like 1980s. So it's not butter in itself, it's the number of calories we're eating combined with other factors, right? Inactivity, other things like that.
This is just really interesting to me because I had kind of switched out canola oil for avocado and coconut oil, and I see it's like way more saturated fatty acids than I would have thought. Like, it's amazing that it's more than beef, milk, and butter.
Yeah. Well, I've used it in the past because I've liked the flavor. If I'm cooking anything Asian, I'll use like a tablespoon of coconut oil. But you know it's there. It's right up there with butter. It's no different in terms of how many calories you're going to get. Did you say you switched out canola?
Yeah, I switched out canola, and I'm allergic to olives, so I typically don't use olive oil. But man, the coconut oil, like,
Well, here's what I'm going to say. You did a good thing by switching out that canola oil. I think a lot of canola oil is processed and genetically modified. So I tend not to buy that whatsoever.
Okay.
So
thank you.
if I was to tell you guys two oils not to consume personally, it would be canola or corn oil. I would limit that only because there's been a lot of processing done to it, and it could and probably is genetically modified. We'll get to that if you haven't yet. You could preview ahead. Genetically modified, they change the actual genetic components of the plant, and it's not a natural product anymore. Something has been altered and done to it to change its composition. We just don't know the effects on the human body of a genetically modified food yet. So I tend to say, let's eat a little bit more natural. So sesame oil. I'm not someone who buys safflower oil, but look at that. I mean, safflower oil supposedly is one of the best ones for us. Olive oil is on there if you could tolerate that. I've seen things like avocado oil in stores. Has anybody used that? Peanut oil?
Yeah, I use avocado oil as a baking spray.
Okay. Yeah. No, guys, I use butter. If my kids want a dessert, I will make it. And I encourage you, if you're going to do something like a cake or a donut, if you make it yourself, it's going to be a lot healthier than purchasing it out. It does take a lot of work. But if my kids want a dessert, I'm making it and we use butter. It's a natural product. A lot of us get in trouble with the processed products, the chemicals, the additives, the stuff that was genetically modified or put into a product that isn't natural. I think that is a bigger concern, the additives and processed stuff, than would be butter or coconut oil. So if you're using it, you can just keep it, at a moderate amount, a limited amount. All right. Those three are our natural types of fat. We went over saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. These are the fats that occur in nature. And you look on your screen, red, the saturated fat is solid and it comes from an animal. So if you ever eat lamb, beef, pork, and you see that white part of it, that when you're purchasing it and it's raw, you could see the little white fat on a piece of steak, that's saturated. It's also in dairy products. Anything that comes from an animal tends to have saturated fat. That's not the case with fish, though. Fish and shellfish don't have the saturated fat in them. I guess only the land animals, we can say. The second type was monounsaturated. Monounsaturated is an okay fat. It's a liquid. It comes from a plant. It really doesn't hurt you or make you much better. It's just kind of out there with calories. It's just kind of there, And then the third natural fat is polyunsaturated, the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid. These are the ones that prevent illnesses. So we want the polyunsaturated. Again, think of what are the foods I want to eat and eat a lot of so that I get healthy nutrients in my body. So I want to eat as much polyunsaturated as I can. Tuna, healthy oils, nuts and seeds. Flaxseed apparently is one of the biggest ones. Flaxseed oil. Chia seeds I eat. And sea vegetables. I know a couple of you said you liked sushi, right? The seaweed, the nori paper, that is loaded with the omega-3s. So those are good options. I would eat seaweed all the time if I can get it. Seaweed salad, I love that kind of stuff. But it's hard to find. Any of you guys eat that seaweed salad or the nori? Anybody? Couple people. So these are our three types of fats, and I've given you examples in each. You should be, if I say, give me some examples of saturated or monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, and I might do that at the end of class, you should be able to give me examples, okay? Let's talk about a processed fat now. The companies out there like Kraft and maybe General Mills, Betty Crocker, these companies, they will take usually a monounsaturated fat and process it and change it into a processed fat. And that processed fat is called trans fat. So it is a processed fat. It is not natural. What happens is they typically take a liquid vegetable oil, usually a monounsaturated, and they transform it. They heat the liquid oil to high temperatures. They pump hydrogen into it, and they process it into something that is called partially hydrogenated oil. A trans fat is also known as partially hydrogenated oil. What happens is, think of it as a vat of like McDonald's French fry oil, just bubbling. It's very high temperature. They usually pump hydrogen into it, and it transforms from a normal like corn oil or soy oil into a trans fat, hydrogenated oil. You'll see it on a label called like partially hydrogenated corn oil, partially hydrogenated soybean oil are typically the two that they do this with. Trans fat directly leads to cardiovascular disease. The partially hydrogenated oils are so bad, let me see if I have a picture, that the government actually banned them in the food supply starting a couple of years ago. If the product was made before the ban went into effect, they were allowed to still sell it. but we should actually not really find many foods with hydrogenated oils in them anymore because it's banned, it's illegal. The reason I still teach it is I've still found foods with it. The companies, what they're going to do with this trans fat, this processed fat, is they put it into a product. It will extend the shelf life of the product, and they only have to use a tiny bit to make it supposedly taste better. So they're only using like a teaspoon of the trans fat versus maybe a cup of real corn oil or real soybean oil. They only got to use a teaspoon of the trans fat. So they're using a lot less, but it will preserve the food and it never spoils. So you can see it on this image here. A lot of it is put into snack foods, flavored foods, flavored potato chips, flavored Cheetos, crackers, cookies, bakery. If you've ever had a frosting on any kind of cake or donut, a lot of that frosting is actually partially hydrogenated oil. If you bought a can of frosting in a store, it's probably all trans fat. Now, it's been outlawed, so we should see less of this now. What they're replacing it with is, I think it's called palm oil now. It's a solid saturated fat instead of the liquid transformed fat, trans fat. But it's costing a lot more money for the manufacturers to use. And that's why they invented trans fat. My fear is they're going to invent something else again in the future that's similar to this. So you want to look on your label. If you see something ever that has partially hydrogenated oil, that's a trans fat. You're not going to want to consume that. They were actually putting a lot of this in peanut butter. What they were doing was if you bought a really cheap peanut butter bottle, it would be peanuts, trans fat, and salt. And they could sell that for like $1. But the higher end peanuts butter, where it would be literally just peanuts and salt, that was going to cost you like $5. So companies were using this again to make money, to cut costs. We heard the same story when we talked about processed carbs. They got rid of anything good in the nutrient wise because it's going to extend the shelf life of the product. So we've learned about, let's quickly review here, and then I'm going to show you a video. We've learned about the 3 types of fat. Let me do it this way. We're going to review with this document here. All right. If you want, you could zoom in on this with this arrow on the left side of your screen. Let's just review fat, and then I have one video I want to show you. So we had those 7 questions. What is fat made of? What percentage should we eat? Types, examples, things like that. So I'll ask you guys some questions, and you guys could type it in the chat room, okay? Or verbally say it. We know that fat's made of glycerol and fatty acids, and in the blood we call that triglycerides, okay? How many calories are in 1 gram of fat? 9 is correct. What percentage of our diet should be fat? Type it in the chat room, guys. No more than 30. So 30 is the max. I usually recommend 20 just to give my brain a break. I'll do, I'm going to go in the chat room here. I'll do carbs 60%, fat 20%, protein 20%. That's what I remember. But plus or minus, 10, you're doing fine. We don't want more than 30% for an apparently healthy adult. Now, you've got cardiovascular disease, you got cancer, you got diabetes already, these numbers might change, but this is for an apparently healthy adult. One thing to know, kids need at least 30%. Why do kids need more fat than adults? Correct. It is brain development. Very good. Their brain is growing, their nerves are growing, their central nervous system is growing. Very good. So we want most of that fat to be healthy. Okay, so we know one of the functions of fat is to develop our brain and heart. What are some other functions of fat? You guys can type it in the chat room. Why do I have to eat fat? Good. It gives us our most concentrated source of energy. We're probably, if you're just standing or sitting right now, you're probably burning about 60% of your energy coming from fat. So it does give our body energy. Why else is it so important to eat fat? It protects us, provides us insulation. So heat, yes, Journey, you're right. Michael, you're right. It protects us. And it carries our vitamins, right? It carries, yep. Leah said it carries our vitamins. It's specifically vitamin A, D, E, and K. So that's the primary reason of eating fat. All right. Now, there are 3 types of fat. We have saturated, unsaturated, polyunsaturated. If I was to say which are the best fats to eat of those 3 types, what would you guys say? The poly are the best. And the best of the best would be omega-3s. Only because the American diet, typically we're already eating meat and eggs and grains, which have a lot of 6s. We need to start eating more 3s. Think of it this way. The omega-3s come from greens, dark greens, whether it's sea greens or land greens. They're coming from greens. And the way they get in the fish is the fish ate it. So that's fine if you want to do it from fish. You'd have to eat a lot of sea greens, a lot of dark green leafy vegetables to get an adequate amount, but you can. And then the other way is nuts and seeds. Saturated would be, of the 3 natural kinds, saturated would be the worst one to eat. I'm not going to say never eat it again. It's just watch out with the saturated fat because you tend to get a lot of grams with it. Like if you're eating beef, you know, up to 1/3 of that product could be fat. So if you're eating, I'm not saying a person would do this, but let's say a whole family would eat a pound of beef. Up to 1/3 of that might be all fat. So, you know, we're weighing about something like 5 ounces of fat. And that can add up to a lot of calories. So watch that. I know when I do make my kids desserts, sometimes the recipe might call for like 1 stick of butter or 2 sticks of butter. And we said that was a lot of calories, right? We're going to be putting in a lot of calories if we're eating a stick of butter. Okay, and then just let's look at it this way. What are some examples of foods that have healthy polyunsaturated fats in them? Type it in the chat room. What are foods with polyunsaturated fats? Walnuts is correct. Anybody else? Fish. Very good. Almonds, good. If you're eating flax seeds or chia seeds, those are great to throw in oatmeal or smoothies. You won't even know they're there. Avocados, good. I've been known to grind up flax seeds or chia seeds and put them in hamburger when my kids are eating it. They don't even know it's there. But just to get in a little extra. And you could also put it in, like I said, oatmeal, or if you're making a smoothie, you won't even know it's there. So polyunsaturated fats, even in a vegetable, if you guys are eating your broccoli, spinach, you're going to get a tiny bit of that polyunsaturated fat. So those are all good things. Give me some examples of monounsaturated, the second one. What are your thoughts when you say unsaturated or monounsaturated? what I think, and I'm typing it here, what I think a lot of it is the vegetable oils. Yeah. Now we know the vegetable oils have a combination of all three, but when I think of mono, I'm thinking, well, we're probably getting in our vegetable oils. The eggs, I believe, are really more saturated because it's coming from an animal. But I do think eggs are a good food. Actually, we're going to start Thursday. We're going to talk about cholesterol before we talk about protein on Thursday. Some people may have high cholesterol or maybe predisposed to high cholesterol. And in that case, you might want to limit your saturated fats, your eggs, butters, and meats. But I think eggs are a great food if you don't have high cholesterol. They are loaded with vitamins and minerals. So if you're someone who has normal cholesterol levels already, 1 or 2 eggs is not going to hurt you at all. It may even potentially help you because of the vitamins and minerals, especially in that yolk. Okay. All right, give me some ideas of foods you guys eat that have saturated fat in them. Type it in the chat room. Foods you eat with saturated fat in it. The coconut oil, I'm sorry. Just use a little bit of it. Keep eating it, but just a little bit. Anybody else have saturated fat in their diet? I had a little bit today. I had some milk on my cereal today. Cheese does have saturated fat. Milk has saturated fat. Yep. And again, I'm never going to say give that all up. We just know we can't have the whole pound of bacon. We can have a couple of slices. We can't drink the whole gallon of milk. We can have a cup. We know what's in it now. Dairy products have fat, carbs, and protein. The carbs in a dairy product are simple carbs. The fat in a dairy product is saturated. So we know what it is, and we make a conscious decision. Can I have this? Can I have a little bit of this? Any kind of meat will have saturated fat, including bacon. All right, we want to avoid processed fat, which is the trans fat. I have a pretty cool video on this if I could find it. Let's see if I can find it. Give me a second. Oh, we only have a minute left. I think I'm going to just end and I'll show you the video next time. How much cheese is a lot of cheese? Well, we will go over serving sizes in a couple of weeks, but a serving size of dairy, I believe it is something like 3 ounces of cheese, which is not very much. Like, did you ever have one of those sliced cheese? Like you go to the deli and they give you a slice of American cheese. That's like 1 serving, one slice of cheese. Milk is 8 ounces. Yogurt would be like 1 container. Those are serving sizes for cheese or dairy products. For meat, when we get to serving sizes for meat, it's about the size of your fist. So 1 piece of chicken, 1 piece of beef, a serving size would be about the size of your fist for meat. We will have a whole day where we'll do serving sizes when we're reading our labels and ingredients. Okay, guys, we ran out of time, so I'm going to let you go. If you came in after I took attendance, raise your hand. The rest of you I will see on Thursday. We'll talk about cholesterol and we'll talk about protein. Andres, I have you. Everybody have a great day. Anybody else come in late that I need to look at for attendance, or you're all good? All right. Have a good day.